Hello, everybody, and today we are very welcome to our program, to our show, our new guests. Today it will be Roman Sheremeta, is a Ukrainian scientist and economist, professor of economics, and more of this, he is co-chair of the Ukrainian American House and founding rector of American University here in Ukraine, right?
Yes. It's very good to be on the show.
Thank you. Very welcome. It's because we are practically summing up the results of this year in our program. So that's why we will try to understand what changed in economics globally and try to predict what will we expect in the next year. And my first question will be about such things that the war on the continent that's further strengthened the concept of so-called new reality. That's the new word, but it's very popular right now. So after the crisis caused by COVID-19, the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, everything this applies to economic globally as well. So what are the features of this new reality in the global economics you see, and how it affected the world?
Well, so as you pointed rightly, we have moved from one crisis to another. We have not even fully averted the COVID crisis. So as a result of COVID, we have a rising inflation in the United States, in Great Britain, in the European countries, in China as well, and pretty much all over the world. So today, when Ukrainians see inflation, they often tend to think that it's a result of the war, which is partly it is, but it's also the result of COVID pandemic and getting out of the COVID pandemic. So the inflation is one of the struggles that we're still going through because of the previous crisis, meaning COVID pandemic, the breaking the supply chain, and then war has definitely contributed to that because obviously Russian oil is on ban. There is a cap on Russian oil, and so there's not much trade with Russian oil. So if you remember at the beginning of the year, the oil prices just skyrocketed and it took some time for them to come down. Natural gas is another resource that has been, under pressure. The food prices, because the grain and the oil, because of the Ukraine is one of the biggest contributors and providers of grain in the world. So we are having another problem, that is the restructuring of the economic supply chain throughout the world. And of course, the third problem, which facing specifically to Ukraine, is that Ukrainian economy is contracting. So specifically in Ukraine, the GDP, is falling significantly. So these are kind of the global trends that are happening around the world. They, of course, are, devastating and much more devastating to Ukraine than the rest of the world. We are in a state of war.
We will talk lately more detail about Ukrainian situation and the development of economy. But now I want to get back to the decision makers and how they can affect the situation from one of very interesting quote that I found in one of the latest articles on the Project Syndicate's portal. So I will quote, if you don't mind. As if the economic fallout from COVID-19 and Russia's war in Ukraine wasn't difficult enough, one also must worry that the response by policymakers will make a bad situation even worse. Growing hardship is all but assured in 2023, and it will provide even more fertile grounds for dangerous demagogues. So it's, as I understand, talking about policymakers, politicians. So what role politicians, not economists, play in this situation? Because what I see, the line, the situation can be much worse.
Well, again, we always have a doomsday, prophets that will say that things are going to be much more worse. Look, we don't know, but the problem with probably what they're saying by politicians is, for example, what kind of policies do they implement? And politicians, they vote on economic policies. So, which is very often not misaligned with what economists think. So what this specific warning is probably about, and that is about the move to slow down the inflation, which, and then this is always, we always need to understand that there is a cost and benefit for everything that we do, right? Any scenario that we choose, there's going to be some benefit and then there's going to be some cost. So, for example, to battle inflation, which, for example, the United States has went up as far up as 11% per year, which is the highest in many, many years. But then there's going to be another camp that will say, well, as we battle this inflation, we increase interest rates. Since people and firms cannot get a hold of money, they won't be able to open new businesses. Running the existing businesses is going to be much more expensive because you have these loans that you have to pay off, and the interest rates are much higher. And so this will slow down the economy and we can run into a recession. And so the fear is today is that the government, especially let's say in the United States, same is probably in Great Britain and Germany, is doing too much, putting too much pressure, that they have risen the interest rate way too high. By fighting with inflation, they have created a completely different problem, and that is that people and businesses don't have access to loans, to money, which can run us into a recession. So that's probably what this quote is about.
This you're talking about America, but
well, I'm talking about it's the same problem across Great Britain. I was in the UK last month. It's the same problem in Germany. I was in Germany again about a month ago. So it's a very typical problem across all the European countries, and even China is facing exactly the same problem.
From what I read from different articles, analytical articles, how the governments of different countries trying to cope this crisis, and part of decisions are lying in just helping the business with the extra money, or helping people. From what I hear from on the streets on Strasbourg, from ordinary people, they explained me that the government helped them to pay for the heating, for the food, if they are limited in money. So it's spending money. And not many countries or governments, because of the challenges to their political future, decide to listen exclusively the specialists who make their forecasts on the basis of theory, risk assessments, challenges, forecasts is based exclusively on the science that's called economy, and decide to make hard things for people, but very wise things for the country. Why is that?
Yeah, so when you go to the countries, like, you know, if you go to Nordic countries, right, like Stockholm, as you mentioned, if we have, you know, Sweden, if we have Norway, they have more socialistic structure, meaning that the taxes there are pretty high and the role of the government is much larger, and the government provides a lot of social benefits. And so when there is a problem, you know, people usually don't have a cushion to fall on because, you know, they pay so much taxes. And so the government often will go and do these things to people to maintain their sort of socialistic. It is a problematic thing to do because, as I said, we are trying to stop the inflation, right? And by giving people a lot of money to buy things, well, we are not making that problem go away. We exacerbating the problem. And so when we are raising interest rates and at the same time giving extra money to people, that sort of that's the policy that kills itself. So we do need to go through some time of pain before we get to normal economy again. And that's something that is unavoidable. As I said, there is always cost and benefits. You know, we need to be willing to pay costs in order to get the benefit of stabilizing the economy, stabilizing the inflation, stabilizing the employment, so on and so forth. And so, yes, when we talk about this sort of policy, that I believe is counterproductive policy. If you raise the interest rate and then you give money to people, that just doesn't make sense to me.
That's what I call maybe human factor. I mean, when the interests of special people is far beyond than the interest of a whole country. So
Yes.
that's why I want to make an example of the latest scandal that appeared in the European Parliament. This the scandal of corruption with the vice president that
Yes.
appeared in a trial. And this is not the first time in our century. This is the phenomenon of eternal, maybe term, if I'm correct to say. But on the other hand, I understand that all these small steps sooner or later bring us to some problems like the war. I mean, if not this human factor, if not this special interest, if not listening to the specialists in different fields of sciences, could we predicted a lot of problems, even in the global economy, even the war in Ukraine? Because all the situation started not on the 24th of February, much before.
Well, so here, as you pointed out correctly, it's there is an individual human factor that is very, very unpredictable, and that's what makes it problematic. So we could have an economy, a country that is going in one direction. Then you have one crazy guy that decides to, push his country into a very, I don't know. I don't have the words. Stupid direction, completely uncalculated, insane way of. We had this happen during the Hitler time. We had this happen during the Stalin time. We had this happen today with Russia, with Putin. So the point is that you have these individuals that may play disproportionately too important role in the country, and they may do things that are just completely in disinterest to their country, but it's with interest to themselves. And it's a very problematic thing to do. So, for example, one of the reasons, that has been quoted why Putin started war in Ukraine is to strengthen his own position in Russia, because his own support has been dwindling down, and the economy is struggling in Russia. And people don't want to have him as a president anymore. And now you have a war, and so you have a common enemy, and then suddenly everybody's supporting Putin. So in Russia, right? Because you have a bigger problem to deal with. And so this sort of narrative that the fact that the human individual people can have a disproportional impact on the country, on the way that it's going to go, it's very unpredictable. It's very unpredictable, and that's why a lot of problems that we see in the world today, they come from that human factor. Unfortunately, we'll never be able to get rid of it. The way we try to get rid of it is by having democratic society, by having democracy, and that's why the more democratic the countries are, the more predictable they are.
You say unpredictable, but let me not be in one way of understanding with you. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Because
okay.
From my point of view, why I reminded the situation with this corruption case in the European Parliament, I'm talking about the mutual responsibility. I'm talking about the years of playing the games with Putin in different countries by different politicians, with a lot of money, with a lot of interest, and not only in Europe, even in the United States and other countries. Some of them continue to have relations in some or other financial way with the Russian Federation. And they knew this, because now they openly say, we mistake, this our guilt, we have to change the situation and improve it. So they are saying openly. So did they really make a?
I hear you.
Yes,
I hear you. But I'm still going to stand on my point, because in this case, what you're suggesting, I will say that that's not a problem of an individual or individuals, individual European politicians. Sure, there is some that have much closer ties with Russia, with Putin, and they have benefit personally. So if you look at pretty much, Germany, Austria, France, and other countries, the top politicians, former chancellors, former ministers, members of the parliament, have been on the board of Russian companies and have been paid a lot of money to their personal benefit. After they retired from the sort of, the political world, they went to get a lot of benefit from Russia. And that is, but again, it's not a matter of individuals. It's actually the matter of interests. And I do think that the world is more pragmatic than, and more opportunistic than anything else. So everybody wants what's best for them. Everybody wants, to act in that regard. The reason Germany built close ties with Russia is not because of Scholz. It's not because of Schroeder. It's not because of these other guys. It's because Germany as a whole was benefiting from collaboration with Russia. The same goes with pretty much every other European country. The reason they were working with Russia, because pragmatically, it was beneficial to them economically. But as I said, there's always a price you need to pay. There is always a cost and benefit.
Okay, let's then follow where this policy brought these countries and try to understand the role of such giants, or maybe they're not giants from now on. I mean, the United States, Russia, China, the European Union, the countries of Asia, because the war in Ukraine aggravated the situation and completely destroyed the usual markets that we got used to, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And will this new configuration of leaders look like this in the nearest future? Or we will see another giant, for example, Turkey, for example, India, for example, some countries of Africa. What will be the new configurations of giants in economy?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's a very difficult one to answer, right? As somebody said, economists are really good at predicting the past. So once it happens, we'll tell you why and how, but now saying something looking ahead, it's a difficult task. Well, let me just give you some thoughts here. So first of all, the relationships in the world will definitely change. They already have changed. So what this war with Russia has pointed out to the world, that we cannot rely on dictatorship regimes. We cannot rely on the regimes that, are not democratic, which, for example, pushed United States to actually start doing more production in the United States and move it away from China, because, you never know. If China decides to invade Taiwan, then we are in another state of war. And so that the United States started to produce semiconductors, something that they didn't have a need in the past. And so you can make these examples more and more. In Europe, as already pointed out, Europe has decided to move away from Russian fossil fuel, right? Move away from gas, move away from oil, and instead strengthen their partnership with the United States, for example. So the United States brings more oil to Europe, brings liquid gas, right? So they cannot transfer through the pipes, but they can do it through liquid gas in the tankers. And so all of these are examples of restructuring of the economy. So the way that I see it is that definitely the relationship between the United States and Europe will become much more closer. In war, other countries will first of all take care of themselves. So we need to rely on our own efforts. So the way that I see it is actually countries that will try to become more independent. They will try to produce more, within the borders, especially the essential goods and services. That's the big trend that I see happening. Now, as far as the centers of influence, as you mentioned, Turkey, China, other players, I actually think that, the U.S. and Europe are actually going to be strengthened from this war as the central players in the world as far as the economy goes. China will actually, I think, will lose because of their sort of trying to play on two fronts, be friends with Russia and be, friends with United States, because China is very dependent on the West, unlike Russia.
This is what we started from, the new reality and how it looks like. So now I see real changes from what you say. But let's get back to two very important but very controversial questions. And now it will be tough, because I want to ask you your position and your view of the real situation in the economics of Russian Federation, because we know about sanctions, we know about the 9 package, the 8 package, whatever. We know about complete isolation, the collapse of everything and various assessments from the inside and outside of Russia. But the fact remains, Putin still has money. His people didn't have, don't have, and obviously will not get used to have money in the nearest future. And what is wrong in this picture of the exception by the world of the situation in economics of Russia? Because today I listened to Natalia Zubarevich, is the economist of Russian Federation. In her latest interview, she says that they're not isolation as we see it, nor collapse happens as we understand it inside Russian Federation. And those prognoses of different international experts are not the reality of new reality in Russia. So what's wrong in this picture of our perception?
Yeah, well, again, I'm going to be very pragmatic, so okay. I'm not going to be painting the rosy picture or the doom picture. Obviously, when you hear somebody from Russia saying something, you most likely know that they lie. I mean, we have known this for a century now, that Russians lie, Russian propaganda is completely lie, and Russian officials, they lie, I would say, 50% of the time. So when somebody, the Minister of Economics or anybody speaks from Russia, I take that with such a grain of salt because, of course, what else will they say? The best assessment of the Russian economy that I have seen comes from the group at Yale University. There's a business school in Yale University that has been tracking all the companies, thousands of companies that have left Russia, that have been tracking the performance of the Russian economy on the academic level. Okay, nothing with this fake, political statements. Imagine all the big companies. I mean, Google, Microsoft, Apple, so on and so forth. And they're never coming back. They're never coming back. It's too much of a risk. That's going to have a devastating impact on these companies, and they will have to cut any ties with Russia. So to answer your question, Russia is crumbling. Their economy is going down. Just a simple thing. For Ukraine, the prognosis, yes, GDP has went down significantly this year, but the JP Morgan, the World Bank, and other institutions are actually forecasting that in the next year, GDP for Ukraine is going to go up, all the way up even to 10%. So we're going to start even in the midst of war, we will be able to restore our GDP. There is going to be foreign direct investment that is coming into Ukraine.
Talking about the self-benefits, let's try to understand the future of Ukraine, because, as you say, the countries are pragmatic. They intend to earn money, of course, to rebuild Ukraine. But from the latest speech of President Zelensky in the Congress, we obviously understood that Ukraine politically is subject, but how it looks economically, because we understand that we have a huge amount of money from European countries to rebuild our country. And the development of our economy depends on the timings till what war will continue. And the longer it prolongs, the harder will be the situation with our economy. So how do you see, from the different terms of prolonging this war, the situation with our economy, and what place, in what sphere is prepared for us in the future of new economical reality globally?
Okay, so there's a couple questions here. So the first question is, as war goes on, what is happening to Ukrainian economy? As I said, the forecast is actually we have reached the bottom, that we most likely will be going up even in the year to come, and significantly up, because first of all, it's sort of the lowest level that we have reached, and the second of all, we're going to have a lot of international help. I mean, think about $45 billion coming from the United States, and that's just something that Congress has already agreed. There's other help that could be coming, and in the years, even within this year, from the United States. This is just from the government. Now you're going to have companies, you're going to have donations, you're going to have foreign direct investment, and then you have $18 billion from European Union. And then there's going to be individual countries. There are going to be other countries that will be giving to Ukraine. So altogether, we're talking maybe likely $100 billion of help to Ukraine. That is half of our GDP at the best time that we had in Ukraine, right? So if we can produce half of GDP and they can give us, we're producing more than half the GDP and they can give us half of GDP, then, we will survive through this war. We will be doing fine. Now, where we will get the money from? Well, first of all, there is more than $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. And there is mechanisms that are being right now put in place in order to confiscate and to give this money to Ukraine, or at least portion of it. So, for example, there is a law that is registered in American Congress that specifically will enable American government, American institutions to freeze the assets, and not only freeze because they're frozen, but to actually give them to Ukraine. So if we are able, that will be $300 billion. Now, of course, we will put more reparations on Russia, and hopefully, with the change of the regime and their country, they will be paying us in the future and maybe generations to come. Now, we will be able to implement that in different way. You'll say, well, how will Russia pay? Well, we will impose the tax on oil, for example. Every single time that Russia trades oil, and they will try to trade their oil or gas, there will be a tax, a small tax that will be paid to Ukraine as a part of reparations. And this tax is going to be implemented for the next 100 years. Just one example.
European money or Western money. My friends who are now migrants, maybe terminally, but immigrants, they always ask about, this is loans or this is charity? I mean, all this money that are proposed by our international partners, we have to give it back?
It's both. Yeah. Yeah, it's both. And then I do believe that a lot of money will be forgiven, for Ukraine, but I do believe, to be honest, in loans. I do believe in loans as well as charity, because the loans put you in the more, responsible, right, in the more entrepreneurial spirit, because when you take a loan, you need to give it back. So you have to be much more responsible how you use it. And so there's nothing bad about that. And as long as the loan has a right, flavor to it, right structure, right interest rate. So the foreign direct investment, the people, the companies that will see Ukraine as an opportunity to actually do business. Because in these countries that are on the trajectory to recovery.
And on an example of Switzerland, I think that the more international capital, as you say, will be here in Ukraine, the more interested will be this capital to preserve their business and money, and obviously preserve the country from another aggression of anybody.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
So my last question will be about your prediction for the 2023, because we understand that now we see the crisis, the food crisis, energy, social, in the form of growing gap between rich and poor people around the world because of the populism of some politicians right now, demographic crisis because of migrants crisis, and so on. All this is with us for a long time. The recession will worsen this next year. Or you are rather optimistic or realistic in this situation?
Well, so as I said, the recession, I don't know if there will be a recession. There could be a recession. But if there will be a recession, I do think it's not going to be a long-lived recession. There's nothing structurally wrong with the economy. Like, for example, in 2008-9, when we had a crisis, that crisis was because we had a structurally broken bank system. The loans were given without accountability, so on and so forth. Now, when we had COVID, there was a problem that caused some recession, but that was, that again was a structural problem. But now we are in this sort of controlling mode. We are controlling our own recession. So we are pushing the economy to recession for a specific reason. I told you, we're trying to battle the inflation in the world. And we are doing that by worsening the economic situation. And that is the cost that we are willing to pay in order to stop the inflation. Once the inflation is stopped, the forecast is actually fairly stable, saying that the dollar should be around 40 hryvnias to $1 in Ukraine, which is, something that is very manageable. So, I don't see a doomsday coming. I do see that there will be a tough year because we will still be battling with a lot of supply chain issues. We will be still battling with inflation to come, but it is I would say, in a controlled manner. It seems that the policies that are being driven by the politicians are, tough, but they are not yet catastrophic. So pragmatically, I do see a tough year, but it's not going to be that horrible as people say.
Well, thank you for the optimistic forecast. Hopefully we'll pass this new year without any other black swans, and hopefully new Putin is not born yet, but
Yes,
new Churchill is already grown up. So we're waiting for the end of the war and seeing all this forecasts and prognosis in the nearest future. Thank you very much for this interview, and hopefully to see you next time again. Thank you.
Thank you.